There you go.
April Fool's Day. We never expected it to be this way, but here we are. So Glenn, why don't we move on to the pledge?
Do you want to talk about the agenda a bit?
All right, yeah. I got a set of remarks. Maybe I should do some of mine early rather than later. The agenda's in front of you. So let me do the introductory remarks, which I had kind of stuck down at the under announcements, but I'll just do them now. I have a list of things. The first, I'm sad to tell you that the rodeo and the rodeo parade have both been canceled. But we have picked John Gordon for the Community Service Award.
Good.
And Keith Anderson as Grand Marshal, and those will carry over to next year, and we will honor them next year. I'm guessing this is the first time in 100 years that the rodeo has been canceled, but it's quite unprecedented.
Jay, it was canceled during World War II, I
right.
think.
Please, one speaker at a time, please.
Okay. Let's see. The other news is our LARPD project, which is down. The swim classes have been canceled, and I am in discussion with Stanford Valley Care about repurposing the moment of funds to help them, because they, of course, are running at saturation, getting ready for this. They have been modifying buildings, building acceptance entryways and stuff. So, and the district has said that's fine. That's higher priority. So that'll get repurposed. I'll explain that to the board as it comes by. I don't know if Yvonne Hopkins is on.
Yes, she is.
She is. Okay, so I'll leave her.
Yeah, we'll do that later.
Later. And then RILA has been canceled, the Rotary Youth Leadership Assembly. They've canceled that. They simply couldn't handle the social and medicinal problems of getting all those kids together in close contact. So they've canceled that for the year. The deposit we made on that will be carried forward into Carolyn's budget for next year. Okay, so that's all I had to start. So should we pledge?
All right, there it is.
You want to lead us, Glenn?
Okay. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Justice for all. And oh Lord, do we need that now? Then here's the president's graphic for the day.
Nope, not yet.
Not yet? Oh. Oh,
Beth, are you ready to give us your update?
All right.
There.
Beth?
Hold on.
I need to be unmuted. Okay.
There we are. I'm getting to it. Everybody patient. It just takes a minute. Okay, there you go.
I understand. Hi, everybody. This is Beth. I just wanted to give a end of the session update as far as our music scholarships. And we have sent checks to 16 middle school and high school kids that the committee felt were deserving. I really want to thank the board and everybody who donated in any way throughout. We were able to give a little bit more in the way of amounts to the students that we did than we've been able to do in previous years. And I know they certainly appreciated that. So many thanks to everybody. I wanted to share a letter that I got, an email that I got a few days ago, right after the kids got their checks. From one of our students. I happen to know this young man. I got acquainted with him back when I used to substitute for the music teachers. He's a special needs kid, but to see the growth, and a lot of it has to do with his musical ability, to see his growth as a human being and his personality, as well as his musical ability over the last about 4 years has just been wonderful. So I wanted to share his email that he sent. Hello, Ms. Wilson. I am honored to be one of the recipients of the Rotary Music Scholarship. Thank you for your generous support of my musical career. As you know, I am very passionate about music. Yes, he is. This scholarship will help me to advance my musical ability. I received the check today in the mail. Once again, thank you for selecting me as a recipient of the music scholarship. Sincerely. Obviously, he will remain nameless. And then I wanted to move on to, we're going to share with everybody one of our outstanding seniors. And we are going to name him. You'll soon see that. But he's a senior at Livermore High. He plays the cello. And I wanted to just let everybody know a little bit about this young man. His name is Austin Weinschelbaum. As far as I know, that's how we pronounce it. He has been playing the cello basically since he has started school, takes private lessons. He is going to major in aerospace engineering, but clearly continue with his cello playing. I was able to call him up and talk to him and get a little bit of a sense of him. And so I wanted to let you folks know a little bit about him and his background. One of the questions on the application is, what else would you like us to know about you and your music? So I would like to share that with everybody. Not every one of the students answered this at all. Yeah, they could leave it blank. But Austin says, for as long as I have known, my family has been involved with music, from my aunt being a professional cello player to my own father being a retired violinist. My family certainly has their way around music. Thankfully, my father decided to share this knowledge of music with me. Ever since he showed me the cello when I was 5, I've enjoyed being a part of this family tradition. When my father entered into hospice because of complications from cancer, I knew the knowledge had not been wasted. Although deeply saddened by his passing, I decided to play in our school's concert the next day. When my solo began at the end of our 3rd song, I dedicated it to him. I played with all my heart and everything I had. Ever since that concert, music has had special importance for me. Every note that I play has a meaning, a reason, a purpose. By continuing to play, I'm furthering my father's legacy and our family's tradition. When I grow old and have kids of my own, I hope to one day pass on my knowledge of music to them and have them understand what music means to me, just as it meant something to my father. Obviously, I just had to share that with everybody. Very, very special thing to say. He's hoping to use the $1,000 that we gave to him to buy a better cello. We are going to listen to him playing very shortly. The Zoom really distorts the sound, but hopefully you can enjoy what he has. So this is Austin. So that's the end of my presentation. Jay?
Thank you very much. That's pretty special. Let's see, to Scott Lamphere, the thought for the day. Scott, are you with us? We knew it was an experiment. Lynn, do you see Scott?
I'm looking. I don't see him. Huh. Nope, I don't see Scott.
Okay, well, we knew we would learn as we went along. That's good. I'd sent him a note. Why don't we do the president's graphic if we can then? Do you have it?
All right.
We strive for a little laughter in everything we do. I'm not seeing it yet. There you go.
Oh, I see
All
it.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. I thought in these times this was appropriate. I had several others, but this is pretty good. Okay.
All right.
Um,
I'm going to go back, Jay, because we had visiting Rotarians or guests of Rotarians. Anybody online who's new to the club or a guest?
nope. I know Mary will come up to listen to John, Evan, and Jessica when we get to their talk.
Okay.
My cat is sitting in.
Ah, yeah.
Just as long as they don't bark.
I don't know if anybody can hear me. I saw Yvonne waving and I see she has some guests.
Yes. Yvonne, you want to introduce your guests?
Exchange student from Belgium who is here learning about the American way of life in high school under siege, I guess. So she's going to be with us for a while for sure.
Okay. Thank you. And
Good.
who's the man lurking behind you?
Oh, oh, I guess he could be my guest, right?
Are you sure?
This is my husband, Dave. I have a guest.
Hi, Dave.
All right. Hi, Dave. All right. We through that. Beth, are you there as the Spur reporter? God knows what the Spur will look like from this, but are you with us as Spur reporter?
I assume you mean the other Beth, not Beth
Oh,
Wilson.
Beth Cassidy. Beth Cassidy. Yeah. All right. I have given Paul's announcements. He said he probably would not be here today. So that's why I did the rodeo stuff.
Okay.
Gosh, I think there's only one other thing for me to say that I could before we jump to the program. Yesterday, Eric Swalwell gave me a call and said, "How are you guys doing? What are you doing? What can I do for you?" And he said he is staying in Washington with his children because so many members of the House are elderly, or many of them are vulnerable to the disease. They need a fair number of people like him who can actually appear on the floor of the House just to do the administrative business of the House of Representatives, not hearings, not debates, not votes, just to keep the wheels turning around. So he was going to spend, the next month or so of shutdown in Washington with his family. For health reasons, that makes a lot of sense rather than flying back and forth across the continent on a weekly basis, which he normally does. He also, as he said, there's not much point in coming out here and doing town halls. And the last thing the world needs is him getting in the way of first responders for photo ops. But he agreed to do a special program for us. So next Tuesday at 11 in the morning, Eric will just talk to our Rotary Club in a 45-minute program and, schedule it for half an hour or so and take questions. As I said to him, I didn't want to insert you in a regular program because we never get enough of him when we can get him, and we won't mind at all if it runs over. So there will be an announcement about that and details from his office on how to get on. I think they will not use Zoom, but will use Facebook for this. So reserve 11 o'clock next Tuesday on your calendar for a very intimate conversation with Congressman Swalwell, which I think would be fun.
Would you explain how we use Facebook to do that?
I have no idea. There's my explanation. That came through congressional staff, Don. It may well be Zoom. Okay.
Okay, yeah, I assume you'll all let us know before Tuesday.
Oh yeah. Oh no, they said they would provide whatever was required. I suspect you're right. It's probably going to be Zoom, but I'm talking to his scheduler, not the guy or a gal in his office who's the IT person. Okay?
Well, we had gotten an email about some sort of town hall, and it said it was going to be on Facebook. So I don't know. Facebook must be able to do some things.
I wouldn't count on it, but we'll see. Well, Glenn, do you have anything else? Shall we proceed to John, Evan, and Jessica?
Well, can you see the screen I'm sharing? We were expecting Dennis Gams, right?
Dennis, are you there? Well,
Dennis, unmute yourself. Okay, another did not show.
All right, well, we'll put that on the list for next week. This is a learning process for us.
And then Yvonne Hopkins had an iHouse update.
Okay, pretty brief, as everybody would probably imagine. Can you see us both here? It has been canceled, and I guess we'll just try to circle back around to it next year. Can't
Like
see much
many-
more
like
than that
many
about it.
other Things. Yeah,
What?
like many other things.
Like many other things, yes.
I let Paul Benke know.
I will double check with him. I'm pretty sure he's got the best.
No, I told him.
Oh, you let him know. Okay.
All right. Well, why don't we bring up the program and I'll go get Mary. I'll disappear for a minute.
Okie dokie.
Fair? All right, I'm gonna mute myself. Oh, yeah, you don't need me now.
Okay, thank you, Jay. John, Evan, and Jessica. Let's see if you are, well,
All right. Okay.
there you are.
Hear us?
Yes.
Excellent. Hi. We're thrilled to be doing this and in these weird times, and happy to be doing the first sort of unusual version of one of these presentations. What we're going to be talking about today is some of the history of winemaking in Livermore Valley. Some of that will cover also what how wine is made. But we recently did this talk for another group that found it very, very interesting. And we really had a fun time researching it and a fun time delivering it. So thought we would basically give it again for
A shorter version.
a shorter version. Our other one was like an hour and a half.
Louder,
Promise to try to keep it short this time.
louder.
Yeah, so you guys, sorry to jump in. It's very difficult to hear you, I think, because of how far you are away from your microphone.
We can. We were a tiny bit worried about that. We'll move up closer to the microphone.
Okay. let's-
Okay, we're all gonna go back to mute.
Okay. Is that better?
This is the program.
Yes, definitely, definitely better. Somebody is still unmuted down there.
That's how you get it louder, honey. Those little buttons.
So we could go to the next slide. So that was just our introduction.
Not yet.
Oh. Okay, sorry, Jess says no. Can we go back to the previous one? Sorry. Okay, so
So this
for
is,
those,
this is a photo. Just so you know, Livermore didn't start trellising until the vines until the 60s and 70s. So this is a photo of a vine at the Olivina winery, probably in the late 1800s. So they all used to be head trained, which if anyone's been to Jay and Mary's house, they also have head trained vines. Just, I had a lot of fun pulling up all the old photos.
all right, next, we're ready.
Yeah.
Thanks. So this is a map of what the plan for Livermore was. This would have been 1846.
1869.
1849. 1869, Jess is correcting me. So this is downtown, and this was the idea that James Mendenhall had for the town. You can see something 1887 label here. We were described as semi-tropical, which depending on whether you're talking about 2 days ago or today, maybe we are semi-tropical, I don't know. Do you want to talk about it, Anton?
Robert Livermore was technically the first to plant vines in the valley. He planted his vineyard in 1846, but it was more for personal use. From what I read, he didn't actually necessarily make wine to drink wine. From some of the quotes from guests passing through his house, they definitely had brandy though. So our guess is that he turned his wine into brandy. Also, by the way, I know there are a lot of you that probably know more of the history than we do. So if we get anything wrong, please let us know.
This was the best research we could do. And there's a few awesome books that people wrote as passion projects. And this history is a passion project for us as well. So please contribute later.
Jessica, this is Alan Frank. I have a couple of corrections on that map to tell you later. That's 1875. That's when the town was in fact incorporated.
Oh, great. Thanks,
Okay,
Alan.
Cool. Let me grab a pen. So the next important people with regards to vineyards in Livermore are Anton Bartonelli and then Charles Wetmore. So we're gonna kind of gloss over Anton and go straight to Charles because he's arguably the most important person in California wine history, not and very specifically Livermore Valley, but he went on to basically be one of the first lobbyists for viticulture and enology in the country, and definitely heavily protected and was an advocate for California wine as a whole. And then he made his home in Livermore. He planted his vineyards in 1882. And he entered his 1884 wine into the International Paris Exposition in 1889, and he actually won the Grand Prix, which he himself won it, not just his wine. So it's a huge honor. They taste blind, and it was kind of a big upset to have a not French wine win.
They made a big movie out of it. For the thing Napa did in the 1970s here, but we did it, not quite a full century ahead of time. And so we hate to say that there was a Napa winery that won an award there as well, but the Livermore wines won better awards than the Napa wines. So we like to gloat about that here in the Valley.
The photo on the left is a poster from the Paris exhibition. And then the photo on the right is it is Clarence Wetmore standing next to the press at Cresta Blanca, which is the name of Charles Wetmore's winery in Livermore Valley. Yeah. Did that answer someone's question?
So Mike Thompson is trying to be heard. I guess, let me, hold on, Mike. I'm just unmuting you there. It'll take a second to, I'm not having any luck unmuting you, Mike.
Oh, looks
there you are. Go ahead.
Yeah. Hi, Mike.
Yeah, I was first going to mention that it was Cresta Blanca was the winery, but I can't remember what the varietal was.
It was actually a late harvest Sauvignon Blanc Semillon. And so it was sort of a Sauterne style. We'll get in a tiny bit more to Charles Wetmore's connection with Chateau de Chem, which is kind of if you want late harvest white wine in the most amazing unctuousness and the highest price, that's where you buy it from. So
which leads us into Charles Wetmore. Before planting his vineyard, he actually toured France for a few years and kind of went and did a study. He went and toured and learned from some of the best winemakers in France all over the country, and came back with a huge appreciation and a desire to create as good of, if not better, wine regions in California.
Certainly his ambition was to do even better. He saw a lot of similarities between Livermore Valley and Burgundy and Livermore Valley and Bordeaux. Everyone sort of thinks Livermore is too hot. We've got this great east-west orientation that the Central Valley and the Bay breathe with each other. And so we get hot days and cool nights, and that's really what grapes love. So the hot days really aren't as big an issue
As long as we cool
as
off.
people think, as long as we cool off, which we do here. So that's a big part. Do you mind next slide, please?
So this is a photo of the wine exhibit in Paris in 1889. I was able to find a French website where I could download a copy. I don't know how high resolution you guys can see it, but there's bottles all over the place.
Let's go next. Next one. So a tiny bit of history, sort of in a similar time frame. The big white house that our winery is named after was built. It was built in 1897 by Henry Myers, who was the Alameda County architect. He also designed and built what was then the county chambers in Alameda, the original Presbyterian church on 4th and K, and then he has a grander version of this house that he built for himself on Alameda Island. He built this as a wedding present for his sister in 1897. This is the oldest picture we have, which is just before the earthquake. And then you can see it in the 1960s, and then you can just drive by yourself if you would like to see it. It's on the corner of 6th and L Street. And that's where my wife and son and I currently live, and where I've lived since 1986. And that's where we started making wine in the backyard. The very first stabs at it were when I was 9. We lived in Paris for a year when I was 12. And then where we learned a lot about winemaking on primitive equipment, and then really kind of got it rolling kind of harder when we got back in 96, and we went commercial in 98. So that's kind of the and then I took over when I turned 21 in 2004. So that's kind of the brief history of both the house and the naming of it. So next slide, please, Glenn.
All right, let's talk pre-prohibition. So I don't know how many of you have been to a winery when we're using our pumps, but although you're probably all familiar with the concept. So the top left photo is what pumps used to look like. They were actually hand done, which I'm not gonna lie, looks very painful. So one of the solutions is the Olivina winery in the 1880s was the first winery, I think,
in California,
if not the country.
Maybe the US. Yeah, we couldn't quite establish that.
That it utilized gravity feeding to do all of its cellar work, essentially, and moving the wine around. So that top building, kind of in the top left corner, it's kind of up at the top of the hill, is where they would crush the grapes and ferment and all of that. And then they have pipes into the building that's in the foreground, and it would go from level to level until it went out. Through the whole process. So they didn't actually need a guy at a pump because they just utilized gravity, which is kind of cool. Livermore has a huge history in being innovative within the viticulture and enology fields, and that is a huge example of an early one.
Yeah. And then here's I don't know whether Charles Wetmore was taking all the photos or something, but this is another one of Clarence Wetmore
in the bottom right.
Bottom right, yep. And these are the caves that Wente now owns, that they used for champagne caves for a long, long time, and now mostly used for events and stuff. But that's regarding Alan's question. These are all southwest Livermore spots, and Bob and Gloria live right there. And then Mike has something to say as well, it sounds like.
Oh, I don't know whether they lived there before, though, Alan. Alan asks, I think Bob and Gloria Taylor, who own Retzlaff Winery.
Well, in your house.
Um,
They lived
oh,
in
yeah,
your house.
that's right.
Yes,
Yeah, Bob and
yes, they
Gloria
did.
lived in my house before us. They were like 3 families before us. That is correct. Yeah, I misunderstood the question. Sorry. Mike?
Oh,
Oh, sorry, still on mute.
I think
Mike.
if you hold the space bar down, you can unmute yourself temporarily.
Well, he's trying to
you
figure
hear me?
that out. Is that
Oh, yeah.
building in the bottom, the one out at Sycamore Grove?
Yes, it is. Yeah. So they are now oh shoot. Well, they're a member of our club, I think. And I'm just totally spacing, but they have the Olivina olive oil.
Crowhair.
And they donate Crowhairs. Yes, please. Thank you. The Crowhairs have owned that property for a long, long time, and they made a huge donation of land to Sycamore Grove Park. I'm not sure what year, but that building is not in great shape anymore, nor is it controlled by the Crowhairs anymore. But that is down, yeah, in Sycamore.
Mike?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, the Cresta Blanca, the champagne they made in the old days was a pink champagne.
Mhm.
And my ex-father-in-law, my former father-in-law, who's no longer with us, was the champagne maker there.
Oh, wow.
Cool.
And we, on my daughter's confirmation day when she was 14, the week before, he found a case of this in his outside shed. And you know how hot it gets here.
Mm.
It had been there for 10 plus years. It was remarkably good.
That's great. I mean, they were even, they stuck around for a long time and unfortunately got kind of bought by a conglomerate, and then
Shanley.
Conglomerate decided that it was all about Napa and Sonoma, but we're obviously sort of Livermore advocates around these parts.
Yeah.
So
I believe Wente bought the property
Yeah.
in the 70s or 80s. I can't quite remember the date now.
We're also trying to rip through this. So next one.
We're going to talk about was pre-prohibition. We had a thriving wine region. We had over 4,000 acres of vineyards. We had as many as I think it's unconfirmed. We can confirm at least 15 wineries directly before pre-prohibition, but I think that it come down a little bit. Most people had gone to just growing and then selling their fruit to kind of the bigger houses.
And a lot of people, it was very different back then. A lot of people made wine, sold them to a bigger house. The big house would blend everything together and then sell it under their own label. Whereas now it's, you have the grapes, you make the grapes into wine, and Crowers in the Morning Club. Yeah, cool. Thanks.
Okay, so prohibition is known as the noble experiment. A fun fact I came across: in the 3 months leading up to January 17th, 1920, and the start of prohibition, the entire US sold 141 million bottles of wine in 3 months. I thought that was just an insane number. There was a lot of stories locally about people backing their horse and buggy up to the winery, filling it with as much as they could hold, and then going home because they all kind of stocked up for the concept of prohibition. Obviously, we all know that prohibition backfired a bit. It was supposed to decrease alcohol consumption and thereby decrease crime in the US, but actually it did almost the opposite. It actually made it so the mob had a huge foothold in our country.
There were major mob sub-families in both San Francisco and San Jose, and they both had play maybe in Livermore, but fortunately though, their Livermore did kind of stay afloat during Prohibition.
We were able to keep our vineyards for the most part.
Yeah, Wente had a lot of great political connection, and were able to make sacramental wine and medicinal wine. And Kincannon, Jim, if you're listening, thanks. And we'll mention you actually specifically shortly. But good Catholic family had a real legit reason to continue to make wine, sacramental wine for the church. That said, people got very religious during Prohibition and started taking the sacrament on their own quite a lot. And so that was one of just 100 ways that people were getting around this kind of absurd law. What the government didn't realize was just how much they would lose on tax revenue. And that ended up being a big part of
why they repealed it.
Of the repeal.
So another clever way vineyard owners in California help survive by selling their fruit is they would ship it in these bricks. So on the right and the left are examples of what it would look like, and they would box them up and then they'd go on trains back east. And so a lot of them had anti-wine instructions. So do not put this in a warm place, do not add yeast, do not do this, do not do that, or
otherwise it might accidentally turn into wine. And so that was yet another way that growers around here were trying to get around.
The ad in the middle is from September 7th, 1921 in the Washington Post in DC, obviously, and it was for grape juice, jelly, and other purposes.
Yeah, so you can guess what those other purposes were.
Yeah.
Next, please.
Yeah, next slide. So yay, it was repealed.
So we all recognize the name on the slide or on the picture in the upper left. This was a carload, was an entire train car full, and they were up and ready to go because they were able to stay up and going. The picture of the humongous barrels on a train car is the Canton cooperage that still exists today. They're up in Napa now, but they were in Livermore at the time. And these were almost certainly redwood tanks lined with wax. Redwood doesn't seal on its own the way oak does. They had a bunch similar to this at Wente, and the front doors of our winery are actually made of staves that would have been similar to these tanks.
So I'd like to talk a little bit. So the wine region in Livermore, and to some extent the whole of California, survived Prohibition fairly unscathed. However, the economic implications of what that long of a prohibition did to wine specifically was actually not really seen until many decades later. In 1934, so just post-prohibition, there were 750 wineries in the whole state of California, and by 1969, there were only 226. So basically a third. And what Prohibition essentially did to our industry is it trained an entire generation to drink hard alcohol. A lot of the immigrants that had come in just prior to Prohibition were Italian, Irish, and German. And so the Germans and the Italians are very, beer with lunch, wine with lunch. It's part of the culture. And so Prohibition kind of kicked that to most extent. And then the way you were able to get alcohol was through hard alcohol, through booze. So the wine industry ended up suffering post-Prohibition more than it did during Prohibition, because of, when we came out, I think everyone expected the sales to just go back to normal, but they didn't have that anymore because people were drinking other things.
Everyone went back to the gin they had known and loved.
Let's see, questions. Oh, how much wine fits into one of those?
Oh, let's see. Oh my gosh, it's got to be probably 2,000 cases ish.
Which is more than our entire.
That's about a year's production for us. And then in terms of how old the wine was, they were able to continue, and so it was probably as it would have been released if you had bought it.
John, you've broken up and we can't hear you.
Oh, sorry. Did we? Let's go to the next slide, and then we can do it offline if we need to re-answer questions. So the 60s, 60s were kind of the dark time in Livermore for wineries, but there was a lot going on and one of the awesome things that it did, and believe me, I'm from a lab family, and we're certainly kind of a lab club, and including Sandia and there, Glenn, is that it brought a lot of scientists with a creative side to Livermore, and that kind of talent, it really helped. The other thing was that the aqueduct came in 69, and almost everything was dry farmed up to that point. So some of the, speaking of Bob and Gloria Taylor, up in the, and they were some of the earliest upstarts. Fenestra, it was a big one. Thomas Coyne was a big one. But really, until the late 90s with the tech boom in the area, it was a pretty slow process to get rolling in. LVC, don't want to miss them. There are others that I'm skipping over right now. But that was when things really got barely rolling again. So next slide, please. So yeah, between 1990 and 2000 even, we were only number 18 to start up, and we started in 1998. And now there's 60 wineries-ish in the valley. So there was a huge explosion kind of in the mid to late 90s.
And a contributing factor to that was in the mid 90s, the South Livermore Valley specific plan planted, which don't go yet, but the next slide I've graphed out acres planted in Livermore, and we can kind of talk about that a little bit.
And so there was a lot planted, because if you wanted to plant a bunch of houses over here, you had to plant a bunch of vines over here. So part of why a lot of your houses have, nice some vineyards right behind them is part of that specific plan. Yeah, like I said, we're up to 60-ish wineries now. Let's do next slide. Try and rip through. Oh, bandwidth problems.
Oh, who is the kid? That was John.
Oh yeah, that was me. as a 15-year-old. Yep, that's my dad, who many of you know. But this was 20-ish years ago. So yeah, and I sound like my dad too. We could probably just swap each other if we needed to. Yeah, we could go next slide.
So this is a graph. So this was some of the hardest data to find, which I didn't feel like it should be as difficult as it was. But this is a rough graph of acres planted in Livermore Valley, starting in 1892 to present day. So I was able to pull from every 10 years starting in 1940 to 2000 from the Alameda County Crop Report. So Livermore Valley is a little bit bigger than that Alameda County, but the majority of it is planted in South Livermore to start with, which is squarely in Alameda County. So we've kind of looked as those numbers as mostly correct. So in 1892, we had almost 4,400 acres planted. And then John can talk about the dip and why it dipped a bit with the disease.
Oh, there were a couple of things. So we don't talk about the earlier one, but the Spanish flu did actually drop production down quite a bit. But that's not the disease she's talking about. Phylloxera is a grape disease, and it affects the roots of the vines, and it decimated grapes throughout the entire world. So up to this point, French wine was planted on French rootstock. Vines were vines. Now everything almost throughout the world is grafted with a phylloxera-resistant rootstock. Livermore was really careful, partly due to Charles Wetmore's efforts to keep Livermore clean from phylloxera. And so there were the kind of inspections that we see today happening 100 years ago, keeping this horrible root pest out of Livermore. But right after we figured out grafting onto California native rootstock was effective, you can see a huge bounce back fairly quickly. And then
Prohibition.
And then we had Prohibition.
Yeah.
Additional little effects in that early time were things like World War I, not a small effect that it had, but then we were able to bounce back, but Prohibition obviously smushed us back down pretty hard.
A little bit, but then you see that it smushed us even further in the decades to follow.
Yeah, people just weren't drinking wine.
No.
People are drinking light beer and hard alcohol.
Yeah. So for many decades, we were fairly retracted on the vines planted, and then the mid 90s, it started to bounce back with all the new development in Livermore, and then them having to mitigate by planting vines. And then it's kind of gone up and down a little bit since then.
Here at the end, right at the very end of the graph, you see a bit of a downtick. There's and that's a lot of the mitigation vines, as the wineries call them, that were planted when all the houses were planted, are getting to their end of their useful lifespan. So some things like Zin, you have 100-year-old vines and they last great, but something like Cab, if you're doing it for commercial reasons, is a 20-year lifespan on the vines. And most of these were planted about 20 years ago, and they just aren't commercially viable anymore. And the developers aren't obligated now to replant. So we may be actually at a lower level soon.
Part of the issue we're currently facing is that the reason the owners who aren't just automatically replanting vines is that economically it doesn't really make sense for them anymore, because the cost of farming is high enough, is higher than they get per ton every year. So they basically look at there's a distinct possibility they'd be in the red every single year.
Yep.
And for a lot of people that aren't being required to continue having vines on that property, they're choosing not to, which is part of a bunch of vineyards have been pulled out in the last
6 months.
6 months.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So part of that is Livermore doesn't have the reputation it needs. So drink Livermore wine, tell your friends, get Livermore that reputation that it deserves, entirely honestly. So next slide, please.
We'll end on a happier note.
Oh, yeah.
This is a photo of Catherine Vajda. She immigrated into the US just, let's see, it was the early to mid 40s, I believe. And she is the first commercial female winemaker in the entire country. And to backtrack a little bit, sorry, the national average of females in winemaking leadership roles is about 10%, which is, I come from civil engineering, and I thought that was a dismal female statistic, but 10% is pretty bad. And I have to say, Livermore, I'm very proud of Livermore. We have almost double that in this valley, which is amazing. I love that. And then during my research, I found out that she was the first one in the whole US, and that was really, really impressive. I'm even more Livermore pride now. She actually started at Cresta Blanca while it was still open and took over as winemaker after her mentor retired. And then she went over to Kincannon, and she was the winemaker over there for basically a decade, just over a decade, and helped train Jim Kincannon for when he took over. And they fled the Nazis, basically. Her husband was Jewish, from what I've been told, and they chose to leave Hungary and come to the US.
So we've got a pretty awesome
We have an awesome region.
Yeah, who's doing awesome in terms of, or at least as good as anybody, better than most, in terms of making sure women who have better noses than us, by the way,
genetically speaking, we do.
Yeah, so more and more that's going to be the case, but and it should be the case. So we can go on to the next, I think.
So
oh yeah,
questions, which it looks like, David, what will this reduction in vines do to the future in Livermore? That is a very good question, and we are trying our hardest as an industry to not have it be a negative effect. I know that doesn't really answer your question.
Background for Zoom, I know it's been out there very long, so I'm sure we'll maybe get
how many calls we get.
I'm sorry, missing that.
If the way that disability insurance is written that you're supposed to have is a full coverage, most of disability insurance.
Okay, I think we're unmuted again here. Sorry.
Okay. Hi.
So I
button at the bottom of the screen.
Okay, I tried to unmute everybody, but there was so much background that I'm sorry, it was chaos.
Oh, that's
so
okay.
It's just you, Jessica, and John, and Jay, and myself are unmuted. Anybody else who has a question who'd like to jump in using their audio, just unmute yourself, and I'm sure we have time for questions. Raise your hand.
Oh yeah.
We can't see everybody, but hopefully.
Well, there's like a raise hand function.
Oh, okay. Oh yeah.
Okay. So I think I heard once that having more acreage was important to be recognized as a wine region. I'm not sure if that's the right term. In addition to having a destination hotel.
Yes.
Well, so with regards to acres planted, that is important, and the problem is that we're in an expensive area, so it's hard to pay the people to do the stuff, pay the property tax on the vineyard itself. And so by the time you get to it, unless you're like super careful people that can do some of it themselves, like Jay and Mary do,
And Splend as well.
and Splend as well, they can make it somewhat make sense. But we've got friends that are and owners of vineyards that we've known for a long time that are thinking of just entirely getting out of the business. So what needs to happen, as painful as it is for the consumers, the bottle prices need to go up so the grape prices can go up, so that more, but most importantly, our reputation needs to go up so that people from Napa are buying Livermore grapes, labeling it as Livermore wine instead of just having it be a filler thing. And so reputation is maybe the most important part of that whole equation. Does that make sense?
Which currently we've had multiple internal industry discussions, and in the last 6 months as well. And it's something we're actively trying to solve on a multi-pronged front.
Yeah,
so.
we're working really hard on it ourselves. So let's see.
Okay. Other questions before we
I
move
kind
on?
of blasted through that presentation.
And went over still. So sorry about going over.
Actually,
Actually, yeah, I was going to say, this is Jeff Youngsma. I had a couple of questions, if it's possible.
Yep.
Yeah.
Can we hear me? Okay. So my first question is, with the potential reduction in vineyards, is most of this land owned in unincorporated Livermore or Alameda County, and how much of it is in the city of Livermore? And it's okay if we don't know the answers to that, because
it's approximately half and half.
It's about half and half. Okay, so then the follow-up question to that is, do we know if it is still zoned as agriculture or agriculture commercial, or is there already talk of trying to rezone it as residential commercial? Because in a way that really regulates, at least if the land is being sold, what the land is sold for.
Yeah, almost all of this, all the things that were mitigation vineyards, maybe not all, saying, that maybe not 100%, but most are set aside with the Tri-Valley Conservancy, and they're set aside in perpetuity for ag use only. So you could put cows there, you could put olive trees there. I think everyone likes the look of vineyards pretty well, but an olive orchard would look nice as well. So one of the
Splend is piping in.
Oh yeah.
Almost all the vineyard lands is in county, not
Okay.
not inside the city.
Thanks, Splend, for
thank you.
clarifying that. Yeah. That was not one of the ones we had prepared for, but yeah. So Splend, who we make our Zin from, says almost all of the vineyard land is in the county, not in the city. So that answers that question better. So
somebody who's not identified has their hand up. I don't see who. There's no name associated with the profile. Somebody has a question?
Actually, it's Pat Coyle. I'm sorry.
Oh, there you are, Pat. Go ahead.
I think maybe you've already touched on this, but I know that in California and throughout the U.S., there are a lot of programs trying to encourage people to go back into agriculture, young people in particular, or veterans to go into agriculture. I think you've touched on this, that's a pretty steep entry fee to break into the winemaking business. And I wonder if, having said that, if there's anything else you would add about this specific initiative that you see in other parts of ag. Here in California, the son of Robert McNamara has got the land-based learning center up in Northern California, a little further up from us. But I just don't know if there are analogous programs to try and reach young people who are trying to make a go in winemaking.
yeah, and I think we as an industry have struggled pretty hard. So for that, partly because parents could get in trouble for introducing their kids to wine before they're 21. And so getting kids interested in this specific area of ag beyond just, hey, let's make some alcohol so we can get, have a fun party. It's kind of tricky. And then in terms of actual,
which they did they lightened the tasting laws in California. If you are a declared enology or viticulture major, you're able to taste and spit within a classroom now.
Right. But then how do you know that this is the field for you? So that this is a weird one compared to, you grew up on a chicken farm, you like the chickens, you want to raise chickens, and so you go to vet school to be a chicken vet. We have a friend in that exact category. So that's something that like you can kind of a little more grow up in. So that makes it tricky. So
I'm not sure. I'm not as familiar with all of the ag programs to get people into college. To some extent, winemaking is a craft still, so a lot of hands-on experience is really going to do the best good.
Yeah. The final thing, it's time for us to get going, I think. But I would love it if there were a way to, like Jess just said, have it be treated a little more as a craft and a little less academically. The academic stuff is actually really super important, but just like blacksmithing, you just need to burn your eyebrows off in the forge, sorry, so that's to really get to know whether you like it or not, and that's one of the really hard things about it being a 21 and over thing. So thank you guys all so much. But
wait.
hope you enjoyed that, and sorry we were TJ. Hi.
I recently tasted one of the Livermore Valley blended wines at the Wood family.
Oh,
and I bought a wooden box which contained the same contribution from 5 other wineries, including you.
Yes.
And I think that is a wonderful, wonderful way to get Livermore identified.
Thank you. That was really, we all love each other, and that was really our goal.
Yeah,
Would you just say a few words about that wine and the cooperation?
Sure. So it's 6 wineries, and it's just because we were the 6 that jumped in head first. So it's us, 3 Steves, Wood family, as you mentioned, Page Mill, Las Positas, and Fenestra.
For the first
vintage. The next vintage will have a couple more. The next vintage will have a couple more. And every winery in Livermore Valley is invited and encouraged to be part of this. And
Explain what the blend is.
For now, the blend is a Syrah Merlot based blend, and then you can do up to 25% of your other stuff as long as you use the minimal winemaking practices. So no powders, no concentrates, no oak blocks, no mega purple, none of the there's a book this thick of winemaking tricks that you can order from, and so none of that, all Livermore Valley fruit. And as soon as you can actually come out to any of us, you should check them out.
I mean, the purpose of the project to some extent was because we all really like each other and we thought it was fun, but also to show off the assets of Livermore Valley, which is the viticulture, the winemaking, and the community here. We are such a cooperative community that we see that as such a huge asset, and those are the 3 pillars of the LVBC project.
Hey, folks, I'm sorry, we're losing people.
It was great to sort of
Let's
yeah,
go back to Jay for final
see you
announcement.
later.
Thank you so much. Jay?
Yeah, thank you. This is a great success for a first try. We weren't smooth, but we were good. I'll settle for that. Two things. Remember Congressman Swalwell next week. Details to follow. You hear it first from Rotary. And next week's program is Pat Coyle with Grid Alternatives, talking about what you can do besides hook up to the wires outside. Thank you so much. I think it was very successful.
Can I just, we didn't get the Rotarian Foundation of Livermore Awards. Pat Coyle, do you,
Sure.
you were willing to jump in for 1 minute?
Sure. I can briefly give you the thumbnail sketch. On the 29th, we'll do a session like this, and we'll be recognizing 14 community organizations and awarding $65,022 to them. And so that's basically what would be. We would envision, like when we've done it at the club before, we'll have a slide deck with the brief on each one of them, and perhaps have them do under 2 minutes a piece, speaking about their work and what we're awarding the funds for. That's the thumbnail.
Wonderful.
Okay.
All right.
And thank you again, John and Jessica. If I could see you, or if you could hear me, we'd be glad to give you a bottle of wine, but that seems sort of ridiculous. Okay. We'll see you when you're open. I see that. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay, signing off. Thanks, everybody. Great job.
There we go.
Good job, you guys.
Holy